Welcome to Mom's Life Made Simple, the podcast for moms who want to go from chaos to calm, from overwhelmed to organized, and to find balance between family responsibilities and personal growth. I'm your host, Chanel Nielson. Let's make mom life simple. Hey, you guys, welcome to Mom's Life Made Simple. I'm here today with my friend Rachel Nielson. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Oh, me too. I am happy anytime that we get to talk and spend time together. So you guys are in for a treat today. This is Rachel Nielson. She does 3 in 30 takeaways for mom. Her podcast is amazing, has had like a gazillion downloads. I'm pretty sure if you checked on her stats, that's what it would say, a gazillion. And for good reason, because it's very just actionable. It's the things moms want to know about. You can listen in 30 minutes, know what your marching orders are and what you need to go and do. And Rachel just has a way of breaking down information that makes it really useful and helpful. And you will see that today as we talk. Rachel is a mom of 2 and she lives in Idaho, and we are lucky to have her. So anything I missed in your bio?
No, I did want to add. So it's called 3 in 30 takeaways for moms because you get 3 takeaways in 30 minutes. So like you said, Chanel, I really try to make it actionable because I know moms don't have a lot of time and they don't have a lot of brain space to remember what they hear on podcasts. So I try to give you the 3 bullets so you know what to take into your life if you want to after listening.
Yes. And I think it's so powerful because I think our brains work that way. Like, we can't always recall everything, that we heard. And then, but if you say, oh, well, there were 3 things, what were those 3 things? You can kind of bring that back and you can remember, and that allows you to go and do. So I love it.
Yes. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's definitely the way my brain works. So my podcast came to be actually because I was listening to so many podcasts and I thought they were so great, but I couldn't remember what I had learned. And I'm like, I just need a podcast that has like 3 bullet points, And then I'm like, I should create that. So I created what I needed, basically.
Perfect. And we're glad you did. We're glad you did. So I love it. Well, I think that's awesome. I think that, like you said, we're all listening to so many things, but when we're listening to podcasts, a lot of times we're multitasking, we're folding the laundry, we're doing the dishes, we're driving the car. And I think that's great to get all this information in. But we need that framework in our mind of, the framework. And so I think a lot of podcasters do try to give the framework, but I love how yours is just so set. These are the 3, this is what you're going to get. So yeah, it's awesome. Well, we are going to dive in. And what I ask all my guests is the same question. How do you make mom life simple?
So I thought a lot about this question before coming on today. And instead of focusing on like systems in my home, which honestly, I'm not that great at anyway, but that's what I was originally brainstorming. I thought kind of an overarching principle for me of how I have made mom life more simple is that I shut down mom guilt. And I have found that by eliminating unnecessary mom guilt in my life does feel simpler, less chaotic, less emotional in a lot of ways. It's just more straightforward because I have a compassionate inner voice that just says, nope, we're not going there. When I start to spiral into that guilty mom feeling, which still happens on occasion. I've gone to years of counseling for this because this is not actually natural for me. I'm actually naturally a people pleaser, had a very negative self voice before I started going to counseling, but now have gotten to the point where it's almost easy for me to notice the thought and think not helpful, not going there, and can just kind of shut it down.
Oh man, this is a skill I think so many of us need. And I love that you pointed out that it's not natural to you, because I think for a lot of people, it's not. So talk to me a little bit about how. Like, okay, that sounds really great. We would all love that. Like if we could just check off a box, we could pick out what qualities we want. Okay, let's get rid of the mom guilt. I'll check that one. I don't want that. But when it comes to practical, how do we do it? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's like we've all heard this. We all know we don't, but it's how do you change how you feel? You're like, I don't want to feel mom guilt, but I still feel it. So what can I do with it? And
Yeah.
I learned a lot of really concrete strategies in therapy that have helped me over the years. Some people may be familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy. I did what's called dialectical behavior therapy, which in a lot of ways there's a lot of overlap. But one of the principles that they taught me in therapy was the sort of the terminology that my counselor used was big picture thinking versus filtered thinking. And she said that so often as humans, we can see one moment or one situation from our day, and that becomes the filter that we see everything else through. And so we're like, I yelled at my kids, therefore I'm a crappy mom. When really it's like, zoom out a little bit, big picture, like look at the rest of the day. You read to your kids, you fed them healthy meals, you snuggled with them, you talked to them after school, whatever it might be, and collect all the evidence that refutes your filtered thought so that you can see a bigger picture.
Mm.
And when I first started going to counseling, that was a very deliberate process. Like she actually had me write out like my filtered thought, my negative thought, and then all of the evidence that refuted it, that showed a bigger picture. And now I don't have to do that anymore. It's just more instinctive where I will think like, oh, my kids have watched so much TV today. I am the worst. And then I zoom out a little bit and I think, well, we spent all weekend with their cousins and they barely watched any TV. They played all weekend hard. And now I have to get caught up on some stuff that I didn't get to do this weekend because we were with cousins, and we're all okay. It's okay for them to watch a lot of TV today. It's okay for me to lean into work today because this day is not indicative of our whole life. So getting to sort of that zoom out, look at the evidence, look at the bigger picture of your story rather than focusing on those individual instances that you might feel guilty about.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Something that I share a lot is at night, and this comes up for me, but it comes up for a lot of the women I work with also, that at night, as you go to bed and you're kind of pondering your day and, how did today go? And you're decompressing, those things like I yelled at my kids, I let my kids watch too much TV. It seems like those thoughts are at the forefront of our mind. And, that's what comes up. That's what we remember, unless, like you said, we actively work to bring in all those other things. We actively work to get to that big picture. We can get really just myopic in our thinking and it gets really narrowed down. Okay, that one bad thing. And a lot of times it's because it has a negative emotion attached to it. It's heavier. And so it's like, oh, that's the thing that's coming to my brain because I attached this mom guilt to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this goes really well hand in hand with, I have a journal for moms called Flecks of Gold, where I teach moms to focus on one golden moment that they had with their kids each day. So that at the end of the day, when they're looking back, they're looking for something good instead of focusing on something negative. And they're developing that gratitude practice of maybe a lot of really hard things happened today, but there was that one moment that is actually a better indicator of the type of mother that I am, or the relationship that I have with my kids, the love that I have for them, and writing that down and focusing on that rather than letting this negative narrative, sort of reign. And in some ways, I think it'd be really useful for moms to think about finding a fleck of gold about themselves or in themselves or their mothering every day and think, okay, maybe there was a lot of things that weren't ideal today, but like, what is one thing that I did really well today, or that really showed my kids that I loved them? And using that as the filter, through which you see your story.
Yeah. I love the way that you teach that with journaling of, getting really specific and just reliving the moment and writing it down and focusing on that positive moment. And that what that does, yes, with memories with your kids, it helps you remember those. It helps, but it helps reinforce what you're doing right so that tomorrow, when you do that thing right, you recognize it. Because it's like this ongoing process. And the same thing that you said, another thing that I recommend is writing down your wins for the day. Yes. And when I first started this process, I'm like, dang, what was my win? It was really a stretch to come up with 1 or 2 or 3 wins. And now sometimes I just write because there are so many wins. And so often we don't give ourselves credit. Oh, it only counts if I did this big thing. But really, there are a zillion little wins in your
Mm-hmm.
day. And if you train your mind to see those, if you train your mind to see the good, you'll see the good more often. And that will help with this technique you mentioned, this big picture thinking. When you
Yeah.
start to get filtered and you're just noticing the bad, you have trained your mind. And I hear
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're saying that you have done over time. So I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is reminding me of a concept I heard from Dr. Julie Hanks. She talks about making a to-do list instead of a to-do list. I love that concept of at the end of the day, like you're saying, Chanel, write down your wins. It's like, ta-da, like
Yeah.
look at all these things I did right instead of always focusing on the things that you didn't get done on your to-do list or that you
Mm-hmm.
did wrong. And it just starts to, it really does change the narrative inside your head, the way you think about yourself, because I don't even recognize myself from 11 years ago when my son was born. It was in his first year of life that I realized just how toxic my inner voice was, because I found myself as a stay-at-home mom with a colicky baby. I'd had a career that I really loved. I was a high school English teacher. And all of a sudden I was home with the baby and myself. And I had to confront a lot of stuff about myself, that like patterns of thinking, and it all just came up for me in that first year of his life. And so I kind of mark now on his birthdays. I think like, oh, he's almost 11. That means I started my therapy journey. I started my, positive thinking journey that many years ago. And wow, I'm different than I used to be. And the way that I think is different. And I think that's really hopeful for if there's a mom that's like, I can never escape this, these negative thoughts that I have. It's just part of me. You can, if you start thinking this way.
Yes, it's absolutely hopeful. And, so often we think, okay, however I am now, that's how I'm going to be. This is me. This is how I am. I'm stuck. I'm a negative thinker. That's just who I am. When in reality, maybe Rachel 11 years ago was a negative thinker, but now you're not. And you're constantly
Mm-hmm.
changing, and you don't have to be locked in to those things.
Yes.
So, oh, I love this first one. You said you had a couple techniques, so I want to make sure we
Yeah.
go on to those.
Mm-hmm. I think another thing that I have been thinking a lot with mom guilt is our kids internalize, well, they can sense our guilt or our insecurity about a decision we've made. I've noticed that I've tried to stop saying I'm sorry to my kids for things that aren't actually mistakes. I am
Mm,
all about saying I'm sorry to my kids when I've actually done something that is not aligned with my values, that actually deserves to feel a little nudge of guilt, that deserves an apology. But as far as like, I'm not going to say I'm sorry to my kids anymore when I can't meet their every need and whim. So I'm trying to save those I'm sorries and be for when they actually should be there, and be more confident in my decisions for myself and my family. So for example, I typically am happy to do kind of a long bedtime with my kids. I only have two, so it's not that big of a deal. I know moms who have five kids. You do have five or six?
I have five.
Five. Like if you gave that much time to each kid at bedtime, it would be 5 hours, but like for my kids, I'll lay with both of them. I'll read a little, I'll chat with them. But then when I can't do that, I started to feel bad about it and feel guilty about it. And I'd say like, I'm so sorry, but I can't tonight and blah, blah, blah. And I realized that they were then internalizing that, like, oh, there's a mom should be sorry for this. Like, so then they'd kind of guilt me and be like,
Yeah.
don't you want to do this? And then I'd feel worse about my decision. And so the other night, my husband and I went out to dinner really quick, just nearby, because my son is old enough now that he can stay with my daughter, and
Awesome.
they watched a movie. And we came home and I tucked them both in, and they were like, aren't we going to read? Aren't we going to do the whole thing? And I said, no, we're not, because daddy and I aren't done with our date yet. Dad, I'm going to spend time with dad tonight, and I love you. And just tucked him in and kissed him, gave him a big hug. And that was that, versus like, I'm so sorry, but I can't. And then leaving the room thinking like, oh, are they going to feel abandoned by me tonight? Or, it's just like this. And they're like, okay, because they could sense my own confidence in my choice
Yeah.
and in meeting the needs of myself and of my partner. And I think we can really apply that widely. Like when I have to work on my business, I'm not going to apologize to them for that, because they actually have a really wonderful life you know? And so I'm just going to say, I have to go work for a few hours and you guys get to entertain yourselves and bye. Like, see, I'm going to my office. It's so nice. My kids are at that age now that I can do that.
Yes.
But I think before I would feel a lot of guilt the whole time I was working. Like I should be with them. And then they would sense that. So then they would feed on it and kind of make me feel guilty by the things they were saying. No one can make you feel anything, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so now I've just tried to be a lot more confident and remind myself, like I said, they do have a really wonderful life. And even kind of listing off in my mind all of the like great things that I provide for them as their mom, that they like, I don't need to feel guilty about spending a few hours on my work or doing whatever it is that I want and need to do that day.
Yeah, I love that thought so much because about kids sensing our guilt, we almost are handing them, I don't want to say a weapon, but that's the word that's coming to mind. We're handing them this weapon to increase our guilt.
Yeah.
Like, here, I feel guilt. I feel guilt, and take a little bit. And then they're like, yeah, you do feel guilt,
Yeah,
mom.
you should feel guilt.
Yeah.
I want you to be with me, meeting my every need every second. Now that you mention it,
Exactly. Even if that's not their intention, right?
No,
But
yeah.
yeah, that's just, we're handing it to them and they find themselves with this sword in hand, willing to use it,
Yeah.
And so, because of course they want what they want in the moment, and that's okay. They can want
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
And we get to teach them, no, you are able to be by yourself, to play by yourself. What I find myself doing sometimes is feeling guilt for stuff that, well, it's because I want to be guiding my children, and like, I don't want them to watch TV without me. Like, I have a son who stayed home from school today, and I could totally beat myself up that I'm here doing this call while he's down there watching TV. This is my 5-year-old. But you know what? It's okay. I scheduled it when he was at school for a reason, and he's home and he is perfectly happy. He's not complaining that he's down there watching TV, right? It's all good. I'm getting what I need. He gets what he needs. And I don't need to add this extra layer, but I do have to say it's a struggle. Like, it's something I have to constantly work towards and remind myself of, that like, no, you don't need to sit here and feel bad for what you're doing, and it's okay.
Yeah. And again, the bigger picture, your son doesn't watch hours of TV unsupervised every single day. This is a rare occasion.
Right.
This is what needs to happen, and it's fine.
And it's fine.
Even a longer season. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was so sick. She's my second. And Noah was a very energetic 2-year-old that was hard to manage while I was that sick. And he watched so much TV because I couldn't take care of him, And so he'd watch hours of TV. I remember he'd have his little iPad. He'd lay in the bed with me and watch it, and I'd snuggle him. That was the best I could do. And that was a season, and when I was in it, it felt horrible. I felt so guilty. I'm like, I'm ruining my child. And because days upon days upon days, but I was doing the best I could. And after I got over that really intense sickness, which took me a lot longer than the first 3 months, but that wasn't the norm for our life, but it had to be for that season. And I had to forgive myself and do the best that I could in that season.
Yeah. It's just reminding me, there's so much grace in motherhood, both that our kids give us, that God gives us, that we are given in motherhood, that we don't often, we hold ourselves to such this high standard. And yet really, we're doing better than we think we are. There is a lot of grace. Sometimes when I'll check in with my kids, like, oh, am going to them, like, I feel like maybe I'm thinking, okay, I haven't done very good lately. And I'll go and I'll ask them, like, how have things been? Or how can I be better as a mom? I like to ask my kids that periodically. How can I do better? And often they'll be like, Mom, you're so great. They're seeing the good things. They're not sitting here worrying about these little things that I feel like I need to do a certain way. And there's grace from your kids. You're giving them what they need. And if it's not a perfect, if it's not perfection, that's okay. That's not even what they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you mentioned that, I just reached over and grabbed an article that I tore out of a magazine the other day. I have on my desk here because it struck me so hard that I was like, no, we cannot do this to ourselves as mothers anymore. Can I read you a little
Please.
excerpt of
Yeah.
this? So this is from the Siegel Books magazine. It's like a catalog,
Okay.
but at the front, there is a note from the managing director of retail sales. Her name is Susan Condy. And she said, not long ago, one of my younger sisters called to catch up. As we chatted, she mentioned she had just gotten off the phone with our mom, who she discovered had been working on a list of all the ways she could have been better and all the things she could have done better as she had raised us. I was so stunned by the very idea. I was not sure I had heard her correctly. She then briefly paraphrased their conversation, which left me feeling incredibly sad. How could our mother, a very delightful, accomplished, and gracious 87-year-old woman, possibly be having feelings of inadequacy at this late stage in her life? And she goes on to talk about, how hard we are on ourselves. And that just absolutely broke my heart to think that an 87-year-old woman who's done the good work of raising her family would look back on her life and focus on the negatives and the guilt and the I should have and make a list of it. I was like, no, we cannot. Like, we have to change this narrative that we have going in our culture, in our individual minds about doing everything perfectly as moms and feeling guilty if we don't, because I want to be a mom who's making a to-do list at 87 years old, not making all the ways I fell short. And like this daughter said, my mother was incredible. I was stunned to hear that. It's like you were saying about your children being like, Mom, you're doing awesome. I mean, this does not apply to situations where there's a legitimate reason for you to be feeling guilt, like where there you have abused your child, or you have mistreated them in a significant way, and you recognize that, and you need to change. And that is positive guilt moving you forward into a better path. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that needless, I want to be perfect and I'm not, brain chatter that just pulls you down and doesn't elevate you to do better. It just pulls you down.
Yeah. I love that you read. That just, so
doesn't that just pierce your
poignant.
heart?
Yeah. I mean, because without some of the things that you've talked about today, without actively working to not be there, each of us could so easily be there. Yeah. It's just, it's the culture, it's whatever, it's the voice in our heads that's telling us that all the time. And we get to choose, are we going to listen to that voice or not? And when we choose to listen to it, then at 87 years old, what's going to be different? Just because your kids are out of the house, do you think that, you're suddenly going to think different? No, you have to think different all along. Yeah. Yes. Right now.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite Instagram therapists, she also has a podcast, but Dr. Becky, she has a really popular parenting podcast, but she just sent out an email this week. And the subject line was, is your guilt really someone else's disappointment? And when I opened it and read it, and she defined two different types of guilt. She said, there's the guilt that comes when you are truly living out of alignment with your values and you want to change. And that's maybe a positive guilt. But then there's the guilt where you're taking on someone else's discomfort or disappointment, and you're feeling guilty that, like, my kid wants me to do this thing and I'm not going to, and they're disappointed, and I feel guilty about that. And I just thought of that as a really good distinction of what guilt we should allow ourselves to feel in motherhood. And even that, like I said, I do not think should be a drag you down in the depths of despair guilt. It should be a motivator of, I want to do and be better, and I'm going to be, because I am not in alignment with my values, versus the guilt that we often heap on ourselves of, my kids want to do this, or they want me 24/7, or they, whatever it might be, and I can't provide everything, so I'm terrible. That's not a productive guilt at all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. To me, the verbiage that's different is mom guilt. When I hear mom guilt, I know that it means the second one. It doesn't mean the true guilt because I, did a hit and run accident or something that I should feel guilty for. It's the nonsense guilt, the guilt that if we dug a little deeper, we would see we can let go of.
Yeah, I love that. The nonsense guilt. That's what we're going to
Yeah.
start calling mom guilt from
Yes,
now on.
that's what it should be called. So, well, Rachel, this has been so good. I have loved spending time with you. First, tell people where they can find you and where they can get more of all the good stuff that you teach.
Yeah. So my podcast is 3 in 30 Takeaways for Moms. And you can find that on any podcast app or on my website, which is 3in30podcast.com. And if people are interested in that journal that I mentioned, that Flecks of Gold journal, to start focusing more on the good, that is also there on my website, 3in30podcast.com/flecks of gold. And Chanel actually has a 10% off code.
That's right.
Yeah, we just barely got that set up before this call. So it's going to be MLMS and you'll get 10% off of that journal. So I would love for moms to start using that tool. That's actually a gratitude practice that I started in that year when I was so discouraged, that first year of motherhood. I started trying to write down one golden thing each day and it changed my life. So I'm grateful that I now have this journal that I can let other women experience this as well.
I love it. I've talked to a lot of people who have used that journal and it has made a big difference for them too. So I think that's awesome that that is out in the world. I'll put a link to that if you guys are interested and want to use that coupon code. Also, as we conclude, my last question for you is just any final thoughts or things that you want to leave people with on how everything we've talked about today, how does it make your mom life simple?
Yeah, I think at the heart of everything we've talked about is that we need to simplify our definition of what a good mother is for ourselves. Because the reason why we have that guilt is we aren't living up to whatever, sometimes even subconscious definition of good motherhood we have created that's milling around in our mind. And so I would sit down with a piece of paper and make it simple. What is a good mother? And write it out. For me, a good mother is I'm actively loving and teaching and delighting in my children. Like that's a good mother. That doesn't mean I'm doing it every single day necessarily, every single moment. I don't have to be perfect, but do I love them? Am I teaching them? Am I delighting in them? I'm a good mom. And give yourself that credit. So make that definition of good motherhood simple, and then come back to it and focus on it in your daily life. When you're feeling stressed, when things are feeling chaotic, asking yourself, am I doing these things? Then the rest I can let go. And then your mom life will hopefully be simpler.
Yes, that is so powerful, you guys. Absolutely take the time to do that, to define a good mother is. And to just, once you know that, you can let go of so many things. I know we need to go, but I just want to finish with this because that was so good. How often do you go to bed and there are dishes in the sink and you're beating yourself up like, oh man, I stunk at life today because there are dishes in the sink? No, you can pull out your definition. A good mom is, and it says nothing about dishes. So guess what? Your house could be a wreck and you were still a good mom today. Yeah. And that's the best feeling. So yes,
absolutely.
Okay. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here. Thanks everyone for listening. And we will see you next week on Mom's Life Made Simple.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Mom's Life Made Simple. Need some help making your mom life simple? I offer group coaching programs using my 4-step method called the Mom's Method. This is a process of manifestation, organization, mobilization, and simplification that will give you the balance, progress, and joy you're looking for. Visit ChanelNielson.com or find me on Instagram or Facebook at Chanel Nielson Coaching. I love to hear from you. Reach out with your questions, your feedback, and let me know how I can help make your mom life simple.